Both Adam Schefter and Albert Breer report that Lions wide receiver Jameson Williams and Steelers wide receiver George Pickens could both potentially be moved, though both teams are not actively shopping either player. If the right price comes along, then of course either one is expendable. And to give my thoughts on it as well, George Pickens is entering the last year of his deal as opposed to Jameson Williams, where he has 2025 and he has his fifth-year option, which late in March it was reported that the Lions would likely pick up that fifth-year option. So 2 years for Williams, 1 more year for Pickens. Now I'm going to go down and break down the stats and show you what they did in 2024 and talk about the pros and cons for either of them. It seems like as of late, George Pickens has maybe been heating up. I saw a couple reports saying that the Packers are interested in looking at George Pickens. I haven't really heard too much of Jameson Williams. To be honest with you, it's more just George Pickens for the reports though. But again, both of them have been reports or speculated that they could be moved. So we're gonna start with Jameson Williams and what he did this season. I'm going to bring up the PFF stats, though the targets are a little bit off because what I have written down is the ESPN stats. But you look at Jameson Williams, 91 targets on 58 catches for 1,001 yards, 7 touchdowns. He had 17.3 yards per reception, which was ranked 4th for PFF. For drops, he only had 2. If you care about going back on the overall grades here, if you care about that, 31st in NFL at 75.5. Receiving grade was 31st as well, 76.5, as well as 3rd in the NFL for receivers at 66 even for rushing. For targets, 40th in NFL, 42nd in NFL for receptions, 21st in NFL for receiving yards, 18th in receiving touchdowns. I think the biggest thing that really jumps out to you is the yards per reception. And you can argue, not saying he's better than St. Brown, but you can argue for receptions to yards that he is more productive than St. Brown. I get they're both used in 2 different ways. Jameson Williams is more your stretch player, your deep threat, as opposed to St. Brown maybe playing the slot, more of the early, the shorter catches, though he can play more so the outside boundary as well. But I like what Jameson Williams can do. To me, he is a electrifying player. No doubt, he's a fun player to watch, difference maker, no doubt about that. The biggest issue, of course, is just the character concerns with being suspended, off the field issues. Is that something you can really truly trust upon for Jameson Williams to long term of whatever assets you're going to be giving up, as well as the contract? If in a couple of years from that time, if he can replicate or get better than what he did in 2023, or excuse me, 2024, there's no question he can make in the mid to high 20s. That is a skill set, and that's what he can do. He is a stretch player. It was a great selection for them of what he can do. Unfortunately, you only have a very small sample size of what he can do, because the first year was out for most of the year due to a ACL injury coming out of Alabama. Only had 1 catch for 41 yards and 1 touchdown. Then you had the second year, which he was suspended for a decent amount of the season again because of gambling. And then of course, I think this past year you had some instance again as well with that. I don't think it led to suspension. If it was anything major in that side of it. So then you have that. The only thing you can really go off of is 2024, which was a great starting point, but again, overall sample size, very little of what he's done in the NFL. No doubt there should be a lot of teams interested in him still, even with the character concerns on that part of it and the very little production of what he's shown. I think I like what Jameson Williams brings to the table for a team, especially that last missing piece. If you're looking at like one team, I really jumps to mind is the Bills. They're missing that deep threat of a player, someone to really stretch the field for them. That'd be a perfect fit. Or, another team would be, if you're looking for pieces, would be the Denver Broncos, looking for wide receiving help with that. I know you have Denzel Mims for that. Marvin Mims, Marvin Mims at that spot for it, but no doubt Jameson Williams would be an immense upgrade for that. And you can also have both of them as well. There's nothing wrong with having 2 speed wide receivers on a team like that. Just a couple examples of that. And maybe countless others you can look at as well. As right now for Spot Trek, when I looked it up, his market value was around $19 million. Again, I do expect it to go much higher if he can build off of what he did in 2024 for these next 2 years, or at least this upcoming season in 2025. The draft compensation I look at as similar to what I'll talk about in George Pickens as well, is a second-round pick. I don't see anything higher or lower than that. In terms of where they draft him as opposed, and then what they get in return, you can look at that as a huge loss in that, with being the 12th overall pick in 2022. If I have that right, yeah, 2022. and then getting a second, whatever, a early second round pick, that's only going to be a loss for that one, as opposed to George Pickens, where he was relatively around that same thing for the second, being drafted in the second round, so not too much of a hit there. Jameson Williams, you can look at the value being lost, but still, again, there's a lot of things going their way with contract coming up soon, again, as opposed, and also with the limited production and the character concerns. Well, I still think there's a team that, or a player that team should go after. No question about that. I love the skill set. Like I said, what he can bring to the table, very versatile, and what he can do there. I don't know if there is going to be a lot of suitors for him, and I don't think the Lions should really jump to that. And I said in the beginning too, both teams aren't actively shopping the player. It's just something they might be open to. Is there a possibility maybe they go in this year's draft and they draft a wide receiver if one of them falls because of this precaution? Maybe they want to move off of him. I don't know. That's only a possibility. I think I highly doubt it, but maybe in the cards at some point. But for me, for Lions, I don't think I would get rid of them. I mean, if there is more problems down the line, of course, you have to make that tough decision and move off of him. But I love what Jameson Williams can bring. I think he's a great complementary piece to St. Brown, to Sam Laporta, to Gibbs, Montgomery, and you look at what he did for his production. That is a very stacked offense in terms of what they asked for a lot of those guys there in that Ben Johnson offense. A lot of players, a lot of mouths to feed on that offense. So the fact that he got over 1,000 yards in that offense to me is very impressive. Having 2,000 or two 1,000-yard receivers, having a 1,000-yard rusher, as well as Sam Laporta, who did take a step back compared to his rookie season, but still was a solid tight end, no doubt about that, and has a bright future in the NFL as well. So a very stacked offense for him to get over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns is incredible for me. And I can only imagine what he can do for another team when you have lesser talent and maybe he can be a bit more of your featured wide receiver, or at least throwing the ball a little bit more to him. So I like Jameson Williams, like I said, what he brings to the table. And I as right now, not too much of speculation of him going elsewhere or teams interested. It's more of the George Pickens side as I've seen as of late. But that's why I look at it as. At the very least, it's going to be a second round pick, and you have to be you're ready to pay in the mid to high 20s if he can build off of what he did in 2024. Now look at George Pickens, a different skill set, not the speed wide receiver, but definitely brings a little bit bigger build, 6'3", 200, and that side of it. For George Pickens, he had 59 catches on 103 targets for 900 yards, 3 receiving touchdowns, 15.3 yards per reception, which ranked 12th in the NFL. For everything altogether, got a little bit skewed for PFF because they have 100 targets, but 30th in NFL in targets, 40th in NFL in receptions, 29th in the NFL in receiving yards, 58th in touchdowns. So not as impressive as to Jameson Williams in some aspects. For the overall grades for PFF, 27th in the NFL with 76.9. Receiving grade was 25th in the NFL with 78 even, and nothing for the rushing grade for that. Though he did have 2 carries for -6 yards and 0 touchdowns. For George Pickens, I like what he can do as well. Again, not the speed wide receiver, but a big body wide receiver can make those amazing catches that we've seen countless times from him, what he can do there. Maybe at times a little bit inconsistent, I think, throughout the season, though, and you could say his career as well. But I kind of do blame that, especially for this season, on Arthur Smith. I was never a big fan of him, never was, never will. I think he's a coach that horribly mismanages talent, as well as just the Pittsburgh Steelers in general for the offense. It has not been great for the last few years. When you look at the carousel of quarterbacks with Mason Rudolph, George Pickens, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson. So, average, above average at best for that. Now, is there not, am I saying there's no blame that goes on George Pickens? I'm not saying that. Definitely the care, going into the concerns is just the antics on the sidelines, is either distraction, always up in the air sometimes. Is that, certainly a problem? No doubt about that. And that's something that, as a Bills fan, not saying he was a cancer, and some people might, push it that way. Stephon Diggs, sometimes the antics did get a little over the top, though I loved his passion. I could kind of see that with George Pickens. Even I see Pickens maybe a little bit more, driven into that side of it as opposed to Stephon Diggs. So I kind of get that for, if you want to call him a diva wide receiver and the aspect, but I think he's very talented, no doubt about that. And I think he can really take a huge step forward if he's in the right situation, like Jameson Williams as well. I'm not saying he wasn't a horrible situation with Detroit Lions. I think he's a great fit there. For me, for George Pickens, I think he can take a huge step on a better team. And certainly a much better quarterback, no doubt about that. And what he can do there, for me, I obviously can see him more of a wide receiver 1 as opposed to Jameson Williams. Though I think both of them are capable of doing that. To me, George Pickens, I love it. I think he has his skill set, his ceiling is very high for me. I'm very high on him as a player. Though again, the character concerns or the antics, I should say, are a little bit worrisome in that aspect of it. And I view him a similar way of what I just talked about for Jameson Williams for the compensation. What you're gonna have to give up, it's probably gonna be around a second round pick. I don't see a first round pick at all. You're not gonna get anything less than that, a third round pick or anything lower. I think a second round pick is pretty fair for both of these guys, and the concerns of what they can do there. Certainly more productive than Jameson Williams and what he's gonna be able to do. Well, with Pickens only having 1,000 yard season, his rookie year over 800 yards, his second season over 1,100, which was great, and then took a step back from the stats with 900 receiving yards. Though I do expect him to bounce back and be better. Not that it was absolutely horrible this year; it was still good, but I do expect him to take a step forward in this offense if he's still with the Pittsburgh Steelers, or maybe get traded elsewhere. Again, he's more reported. Speculation of going somewhere else. Like I said, the Green Bay Packers supposedly had been interested in looking at George Pickens as well, which would be a good fit there. No doubt about that. It's certainly an upgrade at quarterback with Jordan Love, but also in the same aspect of kind of the wide receiver committee or multiple wide receivers you have to worry about in that aspect, as opposed to him being more of the true number one like he has been last few years in Pittsburgh. But we'll see. I think this will be a great piece alongside DK Metcalf if they decide to stick with him. You look at it for both their ages, they're both 24, still relatively young, no doubt about that. George Pickens as well, he is going to be around the same contract, no doubt, as well as for Jameson Williams, the mid to high 20s, if he can, have a similar season like he did in 2023, over 1,100 yards receiving, he's going to get that big contract, no doubt. Whether you like it or not, unfortunately, it just happens for players if they truly, earn that contract, earn that money. Unfortunately, it's the NFL, and we just throw money around left and right, whether it's fair or not. So I do expect him and Jameson Williams to be in, like I said, the mid to high 20s for the next contract, as well as the compensation being both the second round picks. Out of the two, if I had to pick one, it's tough. It really is, because I love what both these guys can do. Got different skill sets of what they can bring to the table. I think I would slightly lean towards George Pickens. Slightly. I can completely understand if you say Jameson Williams because of the speed and what he can do. Absolutely. There's no question about that. I would not argue at all if you chose Jameson Williams over George Pickens. I think if I was a team, I would slightly lean towards George Pickens. Yes, the antics are just, it's annoying. It's frustrating to deal with at times, but I think there is more of a concern and more of a risk with Jameson Williams of what he's done thus far, as opposed to Pickens, where not really anything too much with that besides the sideline stuff. And you can worry about maybe like the attitude and his effort at times as well. That's definitely a concern on top of that. But for me, I would certainly lean towards George Pickens. But regardless, I think either wide receiver, if they do get traded on draft night later, whether that's day one, day two, or after the draft, or maybe they don't get drafted, traded in general, but if they do get moved, I think you are absolutely getting great wide receivers in return, and hopefully for their sakes, they are in better situations. More so for George Pickens, I should say, for the quarterback position, as opposed to Jameson Williams. For Williams' sake, I hope he stays, because I love the offense, I love the pieces they have around there. I think it's a great spot for him and what he can do in his career. George Pickens, for the quarterback wise, like I said, I hope he can go somewhere else and we can really see him elevate to what he can be, because I think he'd be much better than what he's been with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But again, you gotta be prepared to pay that money, whether it's fair or not, whether you like it or not. It's gonna happen. For me, again, mid to high 20s. I think the spot track cap, or the projected market for him for his money, I think it was around 23 million, which I think is the baseline. No doubt that's only going to go higher from there, depending on what he can do in 2024. But for that one, that's going to wrap it up there. Again, we'll see what happens with these guys if they do get moved on draft night. I'd be very shocked. To me, this is just talk. I really, at the end of the day, if I had to guess and predict the future, I don't think both these guys are going to move. It's going to be very tough to let go of one of these two guys. I get there's baggage to them, but just too much talent to give up on, to pass up on and move off of. So I don't see that, but we'll see with just a few hours away from round one starting today on the 24th. We'll see if they get moved on day one, or if not, day two of the NFL draft.